Destiny Awaits, How Emma Became the CEO's Reviled Fiancée Who Could Read Minds. "Do not think your tears will make me come back," she says, voice small and steady in a room that smells of lemon cleaner and cold coffee. 3 years ago, she vanished into a life that was not hers, and now she wakes on a silk sofa in a skyscraper that hums like an enormous refrigerator. The city outside sounds like a river of car horns and construction saws, and a digital clock on the wall glows at a time that does not belong to the woman in the mirror. "You are not the CEO," she tells the man who calls himself Alexander West and smiles as if he owns sunlight. "You are not Alexander West," the guards whisper, and someone coughs into a handkerchief. The staff parts like a wave passing rocks. Phones flash, a faint metallic taste sits on her tongue, and she promises to herself that if fate handed her a script she did not write, she will change the ending. Who would she become if she could hear the truth that lives behind the polite faces? Who would she save, and who would she ruin? Emma Cole remembers other things in fragments. In dreams, she smells fresh bread and hears a sewing machine. She remembers the small town with its single cinema and the bakery that kept change in an old wooden box. She remembers a childhood in which she was known and invisible at once. Then, an accident at a historical reenactment, a flash of white light, the tinny sound of a camera shutter, and a life that belonged to someone else. She lost hours or years she cannot account for, but she did not entirely lose herself. The skill that surfaces now is as strange as the setting. At first a whisper, then a tide. She hears thought not as words, but as textures. A prickly heat when someone lies, a soft gray rain when they regret, the clean metallic tang of ambition. It begins as a nuisance and becomes a weapon. Outside the skyscraper, the West family is a constellation of accusations. Margaret West presides like a conductor who never misses a cue. She inhales power the way other people breathe. Henry West, the younger son, wears disappointment as if it were tailored. Daniel West, cousin and vice president of operations, has teeth that flash like a calculator screen. Amid them are board members and socialites, an army of assistants and security. Emma is supposed to be a prop the family will display to secure an inheritance path and a media narrative. They introduced her as a jester, a fiancée for a CEO who needed a softer headline. They did not expect the cameras to capture the moment she looks at Alexander and hears a low river of fear, a quick spark of guilt, and a slow grayness of grief that smells like old books. The first time she names Alexander. "This woman is a fraud," Henry says, voice precise as a legal clause. "She is an imposter. Do you really think I would pretend to faint a table just to make headlines?" Emma replies, voice flat, tasting lemon on her molars and the sour of too much screen time. There are 8 other voices in the room at once. Olivia Hart, the personal assistant, bites her lip and feels a cold wash of panic. Marcus Hale, the security chief, smells like coffee and machine oil and thinks, "I'm in over my head." A nanny named Rosa whispers a prayer she does not believe in, and the maid, Linda, thinks of resignation forms. The pattern is dizzying. Emma replies not from a place of memory, but from the rhythm of what she hears in the corners of heads. The table becomes an instrument she can play, each lie and truth another note. She is escorted out of the hall into a courtyard where the air tastes of wet stone and the click of tourist shoes echoes against marble. For a moment, she is outside the palace of modern business, and the world compresses to the color of pigeons and the sweet sour scent of orange peel baking in a vendor cart. A cameraman named Ben raises his lens, and the lenses of the world open like an eye. A trending hashtag lights in her mind like a match. Hashtag imposter fiancé is typed in houses and cafes, and the room of the internet fills with judgment. The family circles like animals around a wound. Someone whispers the word contract. Someone else says inheritance. There is a whisper from the CEO's private counsel, Rebecca Stone, who smells like parchment and polished shoes. She thinks legal clause, contingency, and veto. Emma hears it all and answers the only way she can think to answer. She will learn what power sounds like before she learns how to use it properly. Her first days outside the mansion are a collage of confusion and small miseries. She sits in a tiny apartment rented by an old friend named Claire, where the smell of boiled vegetables and laundry soap is a comfort. The city outside the window is a map of urgent noises, a tram bell, someone arguing over a landlord fee, the distant wail of sirens. Emma tries to remember life before, but the edges are soft. She keeps a small notebook where she draws objects rather than write names. She writes lists in the margins of phrases she hears uninvited. Guilty, afraid of losing vote, needs image control, hide the bracelet. The bracelet that appears in the banqueting hall had been handed to her as a mockery and then accused of symbolizing theft. Now it is a talisman that everyone insists on inspecting. The scene spirals into a banquet designed to humiliate. It is a family ritual, and the Wests have perfected ritual. The hall smells of roasted meat and polished wood and scented candles that pretend to be warm. Lights reflect off crystal, and a pianist named Miles plays notes that tremble like glass. Margaret presides. The guests are introduced, and cameras are everywhere. Emma sits in a seat chosen for optics and is given a glass of champagne that tastes like cardboard and fine lies. Daniel leans forward and slides a small velvet box across the table. Inside sits a bracelet, dull and heavy, and a rumor, like a perfume, begins to spread. Someone accuses Emma of swapping a family heirloom for counterfeit currency at a charity event years before she ever arrived. It is absurd and precise, planted to wound a reputation and move heads of shareholders. "You stole from us once," Daniel says, voice like a metronome. "You will not do it again." "How dare you?" Emma replies. A murmur rolls through the room. She hears a thought from across the table, not a voice, but the image of a ledger in a ledger keeper's hand. Henry's ally, Peter, thinks of a lawsuit and the cost associated. The maid, Rosa, thinks of whether she will be blamed if anyone disappears. Marcus thinks of cameras and security footage. Olivia calculates spin. There are 7 named faces who shift like weather. The bracelet becomes proof in public because a photo appears on a phone showing Emma holding an item that looks similar. The family uses the photo to manipulate the feeds. Emma, using her new sense and a stubbornness she will later recognize as survival, insists she never stole anything. But words mean little when momentum toward a narrative has begun. A larger crisis begins at a production site owned by West Industries, a high-profile opening of a new consumer complex called West Plaza. The plaza opened with balloons, a pop of sodium and helium, and the smell of popcorn, and the public was invited for an inauguration filled with speeches and a performance by a conductor known as Maestro Leo. Among the mechanical wonders installed was a suspended art installation that was heavier than the blueprints said it would be. At the ribbon cutting, a support cable snaps and a metal beam falls. The sound of that beam is a snap like a violin string breaking in a storm. People scream, dust fills nostrils, hot metal scent cuts like a knife, and a child named Noah is pinned under debris until security pries the weight off and drags him to safety. The images travel fast. Videos show chaos, and then a clip surfaces that seems to show Emma and someone else near the installation earlier that day. Simultaneously, an online investigator named Ethan Clark releases a thread detailing alleged negligence in West Industries. He posts documents, a redacted email, and a spreadsheet that implies cost-cutting. The company denies wrongdoing. A legal team led by Rebecca Stone arranges for a forensic engineer and a safety audit. Physical sequence begins in the background. Bolts are removed, chains are tested, a quality control system is examined. The narrative goes from local incident to headline in 12 hours. An initial examination reveals that a critical sensor was bypassed by software that reported a false green status even as the load exceeded capacity. The bypass was deliberate. Rebecca speaks to the press with calm, precise sentences that smell of antiseptic and strategy. She uses words like liability and indemnity. A private investigator named Victor is hired to look into the video that shows Emma. Two tension scenes unfold. First, at the inquiry meeting in a glass conference room where witnesses are called, the camera pans and voices become instruments. Emma testifies and there is a pressure that tastes of iron. Her mind reads the prosecutor's assistant, who was both bored and hungry for a career making sound bites. The crowd in the press gallery picks up on small things like the positioning of her hands. In a second tense scene in a small hospital ward, the child Noah undergoes a scan and the head nurse, Grace, thinks through the steps of care like choreography. Emma sits by the child's bed and hears the child's parents thinking of compensation and of blame. Emma feels an unbearable weight, hears the rustle of plastic and the beep of machines, and makes a decision that will pivot the story. A rival corporate unit quietly plants evidence. Daniel and a partner, a luxury goods investor named Sophia Larkin, orchestrate a smear. They fabricate a time-stamped image showing Emma speaking with a contractor known for cut corners. They deposit emails with altered headers into a shard of company servers. They frame her as complicit, the easy scapegoat. At the same time, they leak a doctored contract that includes Emma's signature, crudely forged but plausible to those seeking scandal. The family reacts. Margaret calculates collateral and imagines votes turning. Henry whispers to a senator friend. Miles rings an editor in a business magazine. And the public conversation turns to accusations rather than accountability. The board calls an emergency meeting. Emma hears the mental hum of those gathered: legal contingency, image control, how to pivot the narrative. She hears the seething satisfaction in Daniel's thought, and it tastes acidic. The smear escalates into an online campaign. Influencers pick up the narrative, and a trending video questions Emma's past jobs and integrity. A former colleague from her town, a woman named Anna, is coaxed into giving a quote that casts doubt. A lawsuit is threatened. The perception of guilt is a force that moves faster than facts. Emma sits in a small legal office and listens to Rebecca Stone outline a plan. Rebecca smells like paper and determination. "We fight the smear with transparency," she says. Yet Emma hears the lie curling behind existing words. She will be used as a shield unless she fights back. The pressure is not just corporate but personal. Inside the mansion, Alexander's fiancé status is a rumor that gives Daniel the excuse to move for control, to take the CEO seat, to shift an inheritance. A medical crisis arrives like a thunderclap. Emma collapses during a press conference. Her body betrays her with tremors and then blackness. In emergency care, Dr. Samuel Park examines her and orders a battery of tests. The room smells antiseptic, the lights are too bright, and the soft rubber of gloves is a constant sensation. The diagnosis is unclear at first. There are neurological anomalies that do not fit neat categories. Dr. Park consults a neurologist named Dr. Ming Liu, and they propose a procedure that is experimental. There is an ethical decision to be made. Emma can undergo a targeted neuromodulation procedure that may stabilize her condition but carries risks. The doctor speaks in clinical sentences that try to hold empathy. The description of the procedure, a targeted neuromodulation followed by neuroimaging to map atypical sensory processing, uses non-invasive stimulation and real-time MRI correlation to assess abnormal connectivity. The procedure is described to Emma and her reluctant legal guardian as a measure to control seizures and sensory overflow and to gather evidence of causality between event exposure and neuroplasticity. The clinical explanation, in its pure form, is precise and calm. The process involves placement of electrodes on the scalp, calibration of pulse strength and frequency, continuous monitoring of heart rate and oxygen saturation, and neuroimaging sequences to map responses. The team uses a protocol to avoid overstimulation, and the entire procedure is recorded for medical audit. They explain recovery phases and possible adverse effects, and they collect consent forms that smell like ink and bureaucracy. 2 witnesses sign the form, Rebecca the lawyer and Dr. Park. The procedure works like a miracle of stability and also like a mirror. For a brief time after treatment, Emma finds her mind clearer, and the flood of other minds turns into a chorus she can choose to listen to. She hears guilt unwind into memory strings, and the fine details of the forged emails begin to look like a scrap of work done by one hand, a handwriting pattern only a forensic analyst would notice. This leads to a series of investigations. Ethan Clark, the online investigator, uses metadata analysis and calls in a digital forensics expert, Noah Clark, a different man, and not related, but named in coincidence, who tracks IP logins and discovers a relay through a shell company tied to a luxury goods firm that correlates with Daniel's time at the registrar. A technical perito, or forensic expert, named Elijah Hu releases a report of 300 pages that reads like a map of deceit. The report is messy to read, but precise in its conclusions. It lays out patterns of file modification, a series of overlaps and timestamps that could not have been forged without internal access. That access points to a narrow list of suspects. The company board is stunned. The trending hashtags shift. Hashtag imposter fiancé fades, and West scandal rises. Emma finds an unlikely weapon in a public auction. An item described as the Aurora locket, a heritage piece known to have been in the family for generations, is scheduled for sale at a prestigious house. The locket has a traceable chain of ownership, which could rebut the family claim about the bracelet. Emma studies the auction catalog and consults a curator named Julian Priest, who has the smell of old wood and archive glue. Julian tells her of the locket's provenance, intricate patterns, and a maker's mark that ties it to an artisan in Emma's hometown. Emma remembers that old wooden box where small treasures were kept. She uses knowledge from her past memory and the new forensic report to place a winning bid. At the auction, the room is a cathedral of murmurs, the air-conditioned breath of the rich, the metallic scent of coins, and the rubber of paddle grips. Marcus stands among the attendees and watches, confused at the woman who bids. The auctioneer's voice is a lilt that pulls people forward. Emma engages in a careful duel of bids, and each call and countercall is a step in a dance she did not know she could lead. She wins not merely with money, but by producing a letter of provenance that she found in obscure archives, a letter that links the locket to a charity event in which the family claims it was lost. The audience gasps as she places the locket on the auction table, opens it, and reveals a hidden inscription, a date and a name that contradicts the West narrative. The levers of public opinion shift. The press room smells of stale coffee and heated breath. An editorial writer named Grace Chen writes a piece that reads like a public exhale. Emma is no longer just the woman to be mocked. She is now a figure storylines can pivot around. A wave of support grows from unexpected places, former co-workers from her small town. A broadcast journalist named Noah Martinez begins a segment on corporate accountability, and momentum builds toward exposing the forgery. But the story is not without cost. Daniel and Sophia refuse to go down quietly. They stage a public confrontation at West Plaza, where an experimental art piece malfunctions and triggers an evacuation. The scene is chaotic. Sirens, the hot scent of smoke, the metallic taste of fear. People are moved to safety while investigators in yellow vests comb for signs of sabotage. Emma hears the collective thought of panic, of blame, of a desire to point and shrink the complexity into a single villain. She chooses to confront the situation by going to the place of collapse herself and helping coordinate a rescue. Her hands get dirty from debris, she tastes dust and adrenaline, and she organizes civilians into human chains to help dislodge trapped people. The action is filmed and goes viral. The narrative of a reviled fiancé softens into the narrative of a woman who saves. The public mood is a kaleidoscope that shifts when touched. Legal action intensifies. The investigators compile evidence and file a motion to freeze assets. Daniel is detained for questioning and later arrested after a legal procedure described in court filings and press releases. The legal description is technical, an affidavit supported by a chain of custody of digital evidence, a subpoena for server logs, and a request for emergency preservation of data pending a grand jury review. Officers serve the warrant, and the process involves secure transport of drives to a lab with documented transfer logs and signatures to maintain evidentiary integrity. The procedure takes 3 phases: seizure with immediate inventory, documented transfer with duplication and hashing of files, and sealing of original storage in evidence lockers. The arrest is televised. Daniel in handcuffs, the flash from cameras like small suns. He goes from a boardroom predator to a suspect in a matter of weeks. At a private family hearing, Margaret West watches power unravel with the stoicism of a leader whose weather is only ever seasons. She calculates losses, imagines lawsuits turned into charitable foundations as damage control, and tries to negotiate immunity deals. Emma listens to the contours of Margaret's thoughts and finds sympathy in an image of a younger woman carrying ledgers with trembling hands. We are not only business, Margaret thinks, and the thought tastes like iron mixed with a softness Emma did not expect. That moment produces a partial reconciliation. It is not forgiveness. It is a truce in which the family will admit to negligence, compensate victims, and restructure the board. The cameras call it a mea culpa. The news anchors talk of resignations and swaps of titles and trustees. The CEO steps down from the public role for a season and relinquishes some control to an interim council that includes an independent member recommended by regulators. The epilogue moves like a slow dawn. 1 month later, Emma signs documents with a legal team to create a foundation for safety in public spaces. She funds a program to retrofit old venues and offers grants to small-town artisans who restore heirlooms. Her name becomes associated with safety and restitution. 3 months after the collapse, she appears on a public platform alongside Dr. Park to announce research funding into neuromodulation for sensory integration disorders. The program is technical, with grants and an advisory board that includes Dr. Ming Liu and a neuroscientist named Rosa Alvarez. The press asks if the experiment remains controversial. She answers with measured candor, the smell of ink and anticipation in the room. 6 months after the scandal began, she opens a community center in her hometown where children can learn trades and keep archives. The center is stocked with boxes labeled in her hand and the scent of lemon cleaner and bread. The company enters into settlements and pays fines, and a restructure is enforced by regulators. And a monitor named Elijah Hugh who files quarterly reports. The bracelet disappears as a central symbol of shame and becomes, in a way, a lesson in how a small object can carry a large meaning. Emma, once the reviled fiancée, is now called by some a leader, and by others a curious anomaly whose claims to hear thought make people uncomfortable and fascinated in equal measure. Throughout these months, she maintains a curious humility. She reads minds if they speak too loud, and keeps a secret list of thoughts she will never say aloud. She learns that hearing thoughts is not always a blessing. She learns to close herself with earbuds and noise and to attend therapy with Dr. Fiona Hayes, who helps her practice boundaries. She uses her experience to advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. Her romance with Alexander becomes complicated. The man who was the CEO is not the villain entirely. He has burdens, a fractured childhood, and a capacity for regret. Their relationship is not a neat arc of love, but a complicated negotiation of truth and loyalty. He confesses at one point in a late night, when the city smells of rain and hot asphalt, that he never wanted her to be used as a prop. "I was trying to protect a company that was my whole life," he says quietly. She hears his fear and his loneliness, and also the calculation that once upon a time made him quiet his conscience. They do not end as lovers in a fairy tale. They end as two adults who once hurt each other and try to prevent future harm. To the community watching, the story registers as an example of accountability. The media run features about how a woman from a small town beat the machine. The foundation Emma starts documents 1,200 beneficiaries in its first quarter and receives a philanthropic award from a civic group. The regulators report impositions, a fine totaling $10 million, and a 3-year compliance program that includes independent audits. The board of West Industries replaces its executive with an independent CEO and renames legacy projects to honor safety protocols. Small gestures matter. The family donates a portion of their bonus pool to victims. Some are skeptical of motives. People argue online, in comments, about whether Emma was rewarded or whether she played the system. The discourse is messy and human. One final thread remains. A detective named Maria Ruiz continues the low-keyed investigation into the orchestrated forgery. She discovers a ledger in a shell company with signatures linking Sophia and a shadowy registrar. The documents reveal transactions and a pattern of influence on editorial outlets. Sophia and several accomplices are indicted for conspiracy to commit fraud and tampering with corporate records. The courtroom scenes are sterile and tense, filled with the smell of cheap coffee, the rustle of paper, and the very human creak of judges' robes. The verdicts are mixed and complicated. Accused accept plea deals. Others fight and are found guilty. The legal proceedings take months, and the technical descriptions and filings become the sort of thing that anchors public policy. Emma testifies under oath, the microphone picking up the dry sound of her voice, and the jury watches. She does not aim at revenge. She aims at truth. A month later, the foundation holds a small dedication ceremony at the community center. A plaque is unveiled. 3 months later, a research seminar announces a new grant for neuroethics. 6 months later, the company releases a transparency report and launches safety initiatives that will carry on. Emma sits at a long table in her hometown hall, hands weathered from new work, and listens to children who think of her as someone who came back from a story. She thinks of the old sewing machine and the smell of baking bread, of the tiny wooden box that kept change, and she knows that destiny sometimes arrives wrapped in thunder and quiet. If you were in her place, what would you do in a minute of silence that lasted long enough to change a life? People comment with one word, forgive or punish, and the world spins on the axis of 1,000 small verdicts. The community of viewers debates in the comments, and she promises to read the best ones during a live chat next Friday. She wants to know if people choose redemption or retribution. She wants to know if anyone else feels the small, strange call to protect what matters. The final scene is at dusk. Emma walks through the renovated West Plaza where the new safety railings shine and children chase pigeons. The plaza smells of fried dough and new paint. The locket sits safe in a glass case at the new museum wing, its inscription now a lesson. Someone she once knew, Daniel, remains estranged and in legal limbo. Margaret writes of legacy and of stepping back with the dignity of a leader who has paid a price. Alexander speaks at a hearing about ethics in leadership and admits imperfection. Emma listens to the city breathe and counts small victories. She has changed the narrative of the family, saved people from danger, and created space to study what it means to live with a mind that hears too much. The last line is quiet and true. Destiny does not hand anyone a script. It offers a doorway. She chose to step through, keeping a hand out to help others who come after. If the page will turn again, she will be ready to write with both hands.